So I'm sure you've all heard of this sentiment before, this sort of high, heady sentiment that comes from a certain type of person of religion is good for society at large, right? They should believe in religion. They need religion, this person says. However, this hypothetical person, not me as an individual, am too smart, too enlightened, too, whatever adjective you might want to throw in there, to believe in such a thing, right? This idea that it's strange, it's almost like this intellectual vanguard kind of idea of I'm too smart for religion. Like reading a book about a flood and a boat, not me, I'm too smart for that. But it's good that everybody else has that, right? And I think it's an interesting idea. Not an interesting idea that there should be one guy who doesn't believe in religion because he's too smart and the rest of the world should believe in it. But I think it's an interesting question, right? Especially as morality becomes more blurred in the modern day. I do think it's an interesting question. Is it good for society to believe in religion? Is it a net good to believe in religion? This is a dicey conversation to have, I think. It's one that I've been interested in having for a long time. However, I think has been difficult because it's sort of tough waters to navigate in a lot of ways, right? It's very important that we avoid two things when having this discussion in order to get what could be a semblance of a good answer. A question that's going to be really hard to answer, but a semblance of a good answer otherwise. One, we must separate this from any specific religion. This could very easily go down the road, and I'm scared that it could be interpreted anyway that way because it's a very stupid idea that one religion is what everybody should believe in, right? Like, if everybody in a community believes in this one religion, they're going to be way better than all the other ones. That's not. I'm going to just cut that right there. If you believe in that, this is not the video for you. Check that out. Go do some introspection, because the idea that there is one superior religion over all the others, the idea that we should have any sort of uniform mandated religion, crazy, bad, not good. I think it's also worth saying that for the most part, and this is going to be a blanket statement about religion, that's a dangerous thing to do, I realize that, but for the most part, if you look at the named tenets in any book, they're similar and they're nice and typical things, right? In application, yeah, these are different everywhere, right? But in this idea of the form that they write down, right? If we start getting into this religion could seem good, but they do this and that's bad, right? I think that's just going to get us nowhere, right? This conversation, to me, is not about having a discussion or argument about what culture and religion is doing something wrong or bad right now, or these people should not be doing that, right? It's all bastardized in all different directions, and I think it's very important that we have a level discussion about this. It's important to me to keep it just tend to the books, right? Other thing, can't get into any specifics here, right? Because I think it's let's take Islam for an example. I think it's very easy for a lot of people to go, maybe it'd be great if everyone was doing Islam, or if a community was into Islam, because praying 5 times a day is a nice break from working. You could very easily get in specifics about that. You could go, I believe it's bad to drink in a lot of these religions, right? You could say religion would be good because then nobody would be drinking. I don't think that's the... I think once again, that just veers off into territory of that's you're getting into a territory that is both unproductive and veering on just bad. It's bad. It's a bad conversation to have. That's not an interesting conversation to have, right? It's just, to me, as uninteresting as somebody going, these tenets are great for other people, but I'm too enlightened to follow them. I think it's interesting to view religion, not in any of these terms, but in terms of almost similar Platonic ideals of morality, right? If you read a ton of philosophy, you are going to be so confused on ethics because there's so many opposing viewpoints, and they're going to be many times contradictory to each other. They're often going to be kind of at odds with one another, and because of that, I think that it's more productive for the conversation like this to view religion not so much as a spiritual system, but a code of ethics that people follow, right? I think Buddhism's actually a great example of this, right? I've somewhat self-described as that in the past, for transparency's sake. And the reason I am such a big fan of it is because it's not so much a religion in a spiritual sense as much as it's almost just an applied philosophy, right? And I think oftentimes, once again, if we take religion in their ideal form, not in their practical forms, but in their ideal forms that are written in many of these texts, that's what they end up being. They end up being applied philosophies, applied codes of ethics. And I suppose you could say that the rituals, the traditions, the practices are just the application of that, kind of in pair with the more important ethical codes. Not important, but the ethical codes to be discussed here in this conversation at least, right? So I think with that, it's an interesting question to ask, to say, do we think that, let's just, again, we're going to use religion as a blanket statement, right? Let's say everybody starts following a religion tomorrow, to a T. Would things be better if that happened? I think it's tough to say, right? Because the idea on the one hand of everybody following a moral code, there's, oh man, this is tough, right? Because we're trying to avoid what this has looked like in practice, and the idea of everybody following a moral code together, right? Just being like, we're all gonna abide by these moral, values. That would be really good. Like, again, in theory, this would be good, would it not? Everybody going like, it makes things very simple too, right? Because the law works, but it doesn't work on an interpersonal level, right? If your friend does something that's not breaking the law, but that you kind of don't agree with, that's a gray area, that's a tough conversation. And a lot of things get more simple. When you stop having gray areas, when you stop having conversations, and you start going, well, I believe in these rules, you've abandoned the rules. Almost like the same way that, like, you don't have to debate whether going over the speed limit is going over the speed limit or not. We have a book of laws that go, you went over that speed limit, you get a ticket, right? It's very simple. Of course, because of other things, that ends up being complicated, right? But I think that morality could work the same way, right? And I've actually known people who have fully converted to other religions because it made morality more simple. Instead of having to think about all these ideas all the time, they were able to just follow a guidebook that, like, kind of worked. I think, and this is also what I was alluding to earlier, right? That, like, for the most part, and there are of course exceptions to this, I'm sure. I know every religion has a set of, like, odd little rules that, more or less end up being abandoned. Like, I'm pretty sure you can't eat, like, I think in the Bible or something, it's like, there's like all these things, right? In the Bible, they're like, you can't wear mismatched fabrics, like stuff like that, right? Aside from all those, it's easier to just, like, be like, this is what I believe and this is what I'm going to do. And aside from them, in most religions, I mean, things are going to, like, more or less solid, right? Like, sure, will you have, and I think this is where, like, if you go back and read a lot of texts in the Enlightenment where they start to move away from religion and question it, specifically, like, a lot of David Hume stuff, right? A lot of that is going like, okay, well, a lot of the moral decisions in religion are based off of assumption, right? And that's true. That's very true, right? And that's why we don't just all follow religion, because there's a lot of things that's like, well, that's a moral thing there that I don't know if I agree with, right? And, for that reason, that's why that doesn't happen. But I do understand also that kind of casting that aside, if you're not in pursuit of objective truth and just in pursuit of, like, being pretty decent, like, following just a decent kind of path and not worrying about all these things, you can't ignore the fact that this is going to get you pretty close, right? This is going to get you closer than a lot of other things could, right? So I think with that, it's very easy to go, yeah, it would be better. We'd all be a lot closer to a morality, right? I think for me, if I'm to kind of, move away from doing any sort of analysis and just, like, question, like, would I think this would be good? What would I think about this? I think one of my major issues with it would more so also be that, and this is tough, right? Because we're trying to just discuss the ethical codes here, but the fact is that built into a lot of these ethical codes are power hierarchies, right? There are in almost every religion, like, some form of hierarchy where one person is set over the other. Not in extreme ways, but just, like, there are. And because of that, I think it's worth asking the question, Could you ever actually set something like this into practice and have it remain the same, right? Like, I mean, you know, like we don't even need to discuss right now where this is especially exacerbated, but if you go back in history, like the priests were always, in, you know, Europe, the priests were always figuring out something. Like they were like, what if we do indulgences, make a bunch of money? Like there's always, you know, when you have somebody have power over everybody else, there's always going to be something that makes it, that's making things a little silly out there, you know, that's making things a little worse than maybe they would be, right? So I think if we're to ask the question, like returning to form here, getting back to our base question, would things be better if everybody followed one uniform religion? Or rather, not one uniform religion, but if everybody followed a religion, you know, if everybody had a code of ethics, right? I hate to pull the most annoying answer ever. I think that the answer is like, yes, in theory, until it's not. Because I think, okay, so I think here's the other thing about this hypothetical, right? Let's say that let's say that this is happening, right? There's a lot of stuff here that like, you know, is being avoided in this conversation. How would it happen? What would it look like, right? But for argument's sake, let's just say everybody one day decides to, right? Like nobody's forcing anybody. Everybody one day just is like, you know what? Like it'd be great if we just did religion again, right? Let's say that starts going wrong. Which again, because of me saying like, because of my opinion that like there's always kind of an imbalance in a lot of these, I do think it would go wrong eventually, right? And in small or big ways. Let's say because it's going wrong, people try to break away. The social ostracization that would come from that, I mean, that'd be crazy. Like that'd be like, I think that's the hardest part about this actually, is I think this would be great for like to watch in a snow globe, because I think we would, oh man, because it's tough, right? Because if we're to go, no, this would be very bad, right? But I think like there's a really great argument that it would be pretty bad. Then are ethics always going to be the most subjective thing on earth? I mean, it's worth mentioning here that in religion they're still objective, right? They just have a veneer of objectivity. They're still subjective, they're just less complicated, right? So I guess like, you know, from that lens, it's not like that's really fixing that issue. It's just kind of getting rid of it. Like it's just kind of, you know, sweeping it under the rug a little bit. Yeah, I think I'm really leaning towards no, it wouldn't be better. Like I think it would seem better for a while, and I think that there's an allure to the simplicity of that, of like having just ethical codes to follow. There's no gray areas, right? Again, in theory, I know that obviously in practice there's a ton of gray areas and all this, but I think because of that, I can't, one, as much as I think it's worth trying to ignore it for the thought experiment, you can't ignore that like, just wouldn't work, right? And I think there's too many places that it really wouldn't work for me to be like, this is good. And I think the most pertinent is what I just said at the end there. That like, it wouldn't actually, the allure of it to me is the simplicity of these ethical codes, and it wouldn't actually solve that issue. It would just kind of make you ignore that issue. So, yeah. I don't think everything would be better if everyone was religious. I think we're in a messy spot right now in terms of like morality and all that stuff, but like, I think like it's better than it would be if we were all trying to follow something, and like I think we're gonna end up in a better spot eventually. What does that look like? I don't know. I have no idea. But yeah, that's my take. This is the painting. Another apple. Yeah, nothing to say. Pretty tired of these apples. But yeah, how about them apples? Pretty damn good if I do say so myself. Check us out on the TikTok and the Instagram. Until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Dice. This is from Paint Talk episode 315. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.